Do you ever wonder, why do I always seem to give so much more than I get? All I want is to be appreciated and loved. Is that asking too much? Why do all the jerks get the hot girls while I get stuck in the friend zone? When will it ever be my turn? If this sounds like you, you're in the right place. Welcome to The Nice Guy Show. This is the podcast that asks the question, how do I break free from the nice guy syndrome so I never have to come in last again? Now here are your hosts, Faisal Khokhar and Chuck Chapman.
Hey guys, I'm Chuck Chapman, and I want to welcome you to another episode of The Nice Guy Show. I'm here today with my co-host, Faisal and Ari, and today we're going to talk about father wounds, or daddy issues, if you will. See, one universal truth is that we all have fathers, and regardless of whether or not your father was present or absent, he still had a massive effect on you and your personality development. So it's easy to fall into the trap sometimes of thinking that our fathers hurt us in such a way that we become really angry and upset with them. And when we do that, we fall into that victimization state. Now, there's no doubt that your father probably caused some wounds to you. I know my father caused me wounds, and I know that I've caused my daughter wounds because we're all fallible. And yet, if we don't take a look at those wounds, and if we don't learn to heal those wounds inside of us, oftentimes what will happen is we will pass on those wounds to our own children. And that has just a rippling effect throughout the generations. So today we're going to delve into the idea of nice guys, their father wounds, and their relationship with their father, and explore the bond between father and son and the influences our fathers had on us and our development as nice guys. So Faisal, did you tell me about your dad? What kind of man was he?
Chuck, when I was thinking about this podcast, I was writing yesterday, and I was writing about my father. And my father passed away like 17 years ago, and it brought tears to my eyes. And I thought, this is such a deep and powerful topic. And my fathers are a boy's first hero. You know, like the mother is the first love. Fathers are the first hero. And my dad was very much a soft, gentle kind of man. And he was a great provider. He was a great, he really looked after us. He was a good man. One of the things that when I was writing about him and I wrote all the great qualities he had, some of the things that he was really missing was strength. You know, like the power, the spine, the masculine essence that, we're here and to learn about. And that was what I remember. And I remember my mother saying this, and it really hurt me. It really left a burn. And she said, your father is a good man, but he's got no spine. He's weak. And he's a coward. And when she used that word, it really hurt me. And years later on, I really hated the fact that he had that side to him. So there was a side to him that I really rejected. I know that, sometimes we see them and we put them on either on a pedestal, like Dr. Glover says, we see them as amazing, or we put them in the gutter. So there was some parts where I hadn't fully integrated it. And I really resented the fact that he was not strong enough, especially when it came to his business. He worked really hard. He had his job and he had a business, and he let people and his brothers and his family and his customers walk all over him. And that made me angry and resentful.
What was it about that made you angry and resentful? Did you feel like it was just his inability to stand up for himself? Or was it you were worried that you weren't going to be able to stand up for yourself?
It was more the fact that you see people taking advantage of him. Like, where is your assertiveness? Where is your ability to say no? That's too much, and I wanted to see that courage from him. I wanted him to stand up and say, "Hey, you don't mess around with me, and you don't mess around with my family." And I wanted to see that protection side from him.
Mm-hmm. No, that's great. That brought up a memory for me real quick here. I remember seeing my dad in the kitchen and my mom My dad's looking in the refrigerator for something and he's asking where something is. And my mom just lays into him, just like calling him names. And my dad just looks at her like a deer in the headlight. And I remember thinking to myself, just tell her to fuck off, tell her to stop. And instead, he just kind of cowered and whimpered. And as an adult, I can understand a little bit more the dynamics and issues that were going on in their marriage. But that feeling of just wanting my dad to like stand up for himself was a huge one for me. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I can relate to some of the things you're saying, Faisal. My dad he's a very kind man, loving, and he took good care of us. He's had a successful business for a long time. We were just talking before we started about how on the surface, a lot of nice guys might feel like, well, there was nothing wrong with my childhood. But there can be things missing, and sometimes it's the absence of something. And I think with my dad, there wasn't enough holding me accountable in some ways. I could act out like I was a generally well behaved son, but like, you know, one time I almost got arrested. Um, I was at a concert. I was 21, and I won't say what the concert was, but I threw ketchup. I threw ketchup at the band, and I nailed them. And so my brother and I were brought back by the security and almost arrested. We could, His story is kind of infamous now in my family. And then they called my dad to pick us up. Um, didn't punish us at all. He was just glad we were okay. On the one hand, I could understand it, but it's like, what the hell were you doing? This is one of the biggest blunders of my life. And so there's sort of a lack of holding me accountable, um, that I think has gotten in the way of me seeing myself clearly, and not knowing, when I was screwing up, or when I was doing a good job. I've had a lot of trouble trusting myself, trusting my own goodness, my own qualities. Um, my dad was also he's very anxious around doctors. Um, he lets or he expects my mom to manage all his medical stuff. Still, this has been going on my whole life. Like he just can't manage his anxiety around that, or he can't manage his anxiety when he's worried about one of us. We're out of the house, um, and he can get very panicky. So I saw that growing up, that he couldn't manage his emotions at times, and I think I've struggled to manage my own anxiety too. So there's some of that
Yeah.
kind of internal discipline, internal self-regulation that I've taken on.
Hmm.
And so those are some of the wounds I have. I mean, he's even explained to me, he was scared of my feelings
Hmm.
growing up. He saw me as fragile and sad, and didn't want to make me sadder by challenging me, because then he would have felt sad. Which is very honest and revealing, but also was a way where I couldn't develop as a man, because I was taught that my feelings were, um, scary and unmanageable
Mhm.
by that.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's one of the things that happens when we talking about just kind of the things that sometimes our fathers didn't do. And that's where I think the absentness of our fathers can play a big part into our father wounds. Because if our father's absence, then what we learn masculinity from is from the feminine. You know, like my dad, for example, was his father died when he was 4 years old. And this kind of became the family story then was, okay, well, your dad didn't have a dad, so he doesn't know what he's doing. And so my dad had a real lack of confidence when it came to raising three boys. He didn't. he didn't feel like he was equipped for one thing, and he wasn't, because he had a variety of different father figures in his life, but he was essentially raised by a single mom. And so he was taught about masculinity from the perspective of the feminine, and, what not to do. And this was back in the 1940s. And so when my grandfather passed away, my grandmother, was a widow and somebody who didn't come from a place of affluence. Like, the way that she survived was by getting with falling in love with other men and having them marry her. And so a lot of times the men that she would pick were not men who were like good men. And so my father would see toxic masculinity, if you will, going on in his home, his mother getting hurt, and then his mother coming back and saying, don't be a man, essentially. So then my father passed that on to me in his own woundedness. And my father was a very busy man. He was either working or involved with his church. And so a lot of the perspective of masculinity I got indirectly was from my mom, who had her own father wounds. Uh, and so she was teaching me, on the one hand, don't be like other men. And my father's teaching me, on the other hand, be, if you're a man, then you should be more soft and gentle and pliable and those kind of things. So we all take those different wounds on within ourselves, and then our perspective of what masculinity is, I think, gets really skewed.
Yeah, I can really see how when we take there's a wonderful book which talks about enmeshment, and it says about when there is no present father, we take on the template of the mother. And when we take on the template of the mother, we'll take on her emotional regulation and system, and then we'll take on her perspective of the world. And there's a lot of dumbing down of men. We have to be soft and gentle, but yet within ourselves, when Ari, you were sharing as well, and Chuck, you were sharing, one of the things as a father myself, one of the things my son says is, he wants that strong boundaries. He wants that assertiveness. Like I was craving that for my dad. And what I notice is when we have too much softness or too much freedom, we crave the aspect of, hold me accountable, tell me, just shake me and say, this is wrong, what I'm doing wrong. And then when we have too much tyranny, when we have too much grip, then we need some freedom. And what I see between is that we either get too much freedom, softness, or too hard, but there's never a good balance. And that reminds me when my son, when he lived with his mum, and she was very soft and gentle. And that's where he really struggled. And when he was about 13 years old, and he was like, I'm really struggling living with mom. And eventually he moved over. There was a lot of things that happened. And he went through PTSD. He went through some trauma with his stepdad, and he moved in here. And when I gave him some rules, principles, and regulations, and I remember one day he was lying in bed and he said, Dad, there was a moment in my life I really wanted to take my own life. And it just broke my heart. And he said, look, there was a real dark moment in my life. And he said, being with you, being around you, because you are strict and you have some principles, he says, it calls me up to be a better man. It pushes me and it drives me. And he rebels against it. I know that. I can see him rebelling against it. But he says it pulls me up. And listening to you guys as well, I can see where we wanted that balance of, we wanted some empathy, we wanted some love, but we also wanted some, guidance, principles. And hey, listen, if you step out of line, there is going to be a price to pay as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I know that's true in my life. Like I wanted the strictness, and I think one of my, because of the father wound and not knowing what it was to be a man, that was the primary reason why at 18 years old I joined the military, because I wanted more discipline in my life. I knew I was lacking that discipline and I wanted more of it. So that was that joining the military was actually a response to my father wound, which was a lack of masculinity.
Interesting.
Do you think that we, as boys, when we're young as boys, that we don't always know how to articulate it, but in hindsight we're saying actually we need some principles, we need some guidance, we need some discipline, we need some structure. That's in a way of what we're looking for, and we probably do that because we're rebellious, but we don't actually know how to articulate it.
Most people, I think, chafe against um, discipline and structure. So there's always going to be pushback. Um,
But I
but
think
I think you're totally right that kids are needing this desperately, and it sounds like all three of us were missing some of that growing up, and that's the work that we had to do as adults to figure out how to put that structure in for ourselves, or how to find those masculine figures who can teach us that.
and I think Ari, what you just said there was beautiful in that one of the aspects of the masculine is the capacity to hold tension, right? And so while people chafe against discipline, right, that creates this tension. And so when our fathers aren't able to hold that tension and hold us accountable, then and they let us go, then they're not in their higher masculine self of creating a container for us that holds this tension. And I think when that's not modeled for us, the ability to hold tension, I think, is one of the most primary aspects of the masculine. And yet it's the very thing that the masculine hates, especially nice guys, right? We want to kill any kind of tension.
Oh
We
yeah.
just want everything to be problem free and easy. And
Yeah.
and I think the other thing that I have grappled with was the idea of discipline as being punishment. Like you step out of line, you get punished. And so you're really chasing not being punished as opposed to discipline. At least that was how I felt. I felt like I was just trying to avoid punishment as opposed to like I want to develop a discipline inside of me, the discipline to be able to hold tension, the discipline to be able to have a backbone, the discipline to be able to say, this is right, I'm standing up for this. This is wrong, I'm not going to do it. That the discipline, the aspect of the discipline is to create good citizens. And that when I'm not disciplined, what happens then is there's the chaos that happens. So that's, I think that's a beautiful way to put it, Ari, is that, sometimes we just need our fathers to be like lovingly hold us in that space of tension and like, no, you're not going anywhere,
But also kick us as well. Kick our ass for if you're stepping out of line. Because do you find that, because all three of us, we coach as well, do you find that with your clients as well, that they come not just for the information, because they can get that everywhere, but they also come for that support, but also that guidance as well? Because I noticed that myself, when I'm getting coaching, I just don't want the softness. I want somebody to say, right, Faisal, what are you doing? You need to step up. You need to move. You're being lazy here, or you're slacking here. I need that push and that drive, because I don't have the father anymore, but I do have, guides who support me and push me and challenge me. Because there's a part of being the nice guy is like, I don't want to be pushed or challenged. I want to be comfortable. But then deep down, when you dig into yourself, there's a part of saying, I really need to get my shit together. I really need to push. I really need to drive forward. And I need someone to be that big stick.
Yeah, and I think yeah, that's such a crucial part of coaching. I mean, that's a lot of, or it's an important part of what nice guys need, is they need coaching around what discipline is, why it's valuable, and how to develop it in yourself, how to develop that internal resilience, how to build your own practices. Because yeah, it's not so much about information. It's how do you develop these discipline practices, whether it's meditation or journaling, or I love the cold showers. I know you do, like the fasts. these are all teaching people internal discipline, and it's just it ripples out through the rest of their life.
And I think it has to come from a place of love too, because of discipline that's just punishment, just like get back in line. Like if I'm, setting boundaries with the client, for example, oftentimes I'll preface it with I'm going to give you some tough love here. I'm doing this because I love you, not because I want something from you. I want you to be able to do the very things that you said you want to be able to do. And so I'm going to hold you accountable to those things. I'm also going to do it with a lot of cheering and enthusiasm and positivity. But there does come a point where I think you have to say, listen, you've been doing the same thing over and over again. Do you really want this? Because if you don't want it, just say so. Because otherwise you're just wasting my time and your time. But
Yeah.
if you want it, I will hold you accountable, and I will talk to you in a way that's like, listen, you're wasting your time here. So I think there's a finesse to it in that it has to come from a place of love as opposed to just like this dominance, like I'm going to make you a man, kind of thing. But I don't know. What do you guys think about that?
I really like how you just verbalize that to clients. I'm going to give you some tough love.
Yeah.
It softens it a little bit, but
Yeah.
but it also educates them that this is
It's not going to be pleasant.
discipline or challenge, but it's coming from a loving place, which is what we really needed from our fathers.
Right.
We needed to love us enough to give us that discipline that we needed, or that accountability that we needed, because it's actually something that's going to help us in so many ways in our life.
Mm-hmm.
But that, now we know, I think all three of us know how to teach that to people.
Yeah.
This isn't taught to fathers.
No.
How to do this.
This is I think this is what's really missing, because I remember yesterday was so with me and my son, we had to sort some stuff out, and I said, look, we really need to step up. And what came up for me, and some of my wounds that came up, was I noticed myself, my son is very disagreeable. He's very headstrong and he can push. And what I notice is when he pushes, I can see myself wavering, and I can see myself when I'm angry, then I can enforce a boundary. But when I'm not angry, then I'm really sometimes can be pushed. And I thought, well, I really need to stand strong here, and then take that, like Chuck, you said, that tension and that anxiety and that pain. I've got to be able to say no, and then be okay with how he reacts. And if he's going to protest against this, I still need to be able to stand my ground. And this was a great realization, was I really need to hold ground and stick with it, just because he doesn't like it. But it's tough love. For the long term, it's tough love. I love the saying, and in Stoicism they say this, it's, give your kids a good life, but not an easy life. Give your kids a good life, but not an easy life. And I keep saying this to my sons. I'm talking about, hard times create strong men, and he really gets this, and he does appreciate it. Not in the moment; he'll have his, quarrel with it, but he says, I appreciate it, I understand, and we have a dialogue about this. And this is what I really miss with my father, is him being able to articulate the importance of it, why it's important, why we need to do this as men, how it plans out, not now, but in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years time. And I think when we miss this dialogue, we miss that ability to connect. And it's in that dialogue we're connecting and also understanding why we're doing what we're doing.
And I love that imagery of your son pushing against you. It sort of reminds me of like a couple of elk, sort of like the bull elk and then the younger elk, and they're clashing,
like,
kind of thing, right? They're clashing. And there's this part of it where, especially when they're younger, where, they come against you and and you're just like, you know, yeah, go do what you said, go do what I told you to do. But then when they're older and they're becoming into their own masculine, it's like, it's harder and harder, and you start to get bruised, and you start to get like, oh, okay, that wasn't as easy when they were younger. And that's the beautiful thing, that as long as you're creating that tension within them, there needs to come a point in which your son wins. That it's that, like, he crosses over into his own bull elk, and I think that's a rite of passage. And a lot of times in rites of passage, the bull elk will allow the younger elk, I don't know if it's elks or what, whatever, but will allow that, sort of feign a little bit of weakness, to allow their sons to feel that sense of strength, to feel like, oh yeah, I took on the old man. And it almost becomes a rite of passage then at that point of, oh yeah, I can stand on my own. So
Yeah, and he does. This is the good thing about it. He shows he can hold his ground, but what it is not being stubborn. And sometimes the stubbornness comes into it. But what he's learned, and I've learned over the time, is being able to hold the ground, but have a good reason for it, and be open to discussion about it. So, for example, there were some times when he held his ground, and then he explained and articulated, and I was like, okay, you know what? That's a really good point, and therefore I'm going to step down and then learn from this point. Yeah. So sometimes, before I would have had my stubborn hat on, because I'm like, I'm right, and this is how it should be because I'm the dad. But now, one of the things that we're teaching each other, or what I'm teaching him, is like, give a good explanation to why this is. It's not going to be given to you just because you scream for it. Rationalize it, articulate it well.
I think one of the things that you're describing that you do well is you spend a good amount of time with your son, and you do activities with him, and that presence allows for conversation and dialogue to happen. The dialogue doesn't always happen at the times that we want as parents. So if you're not spending sufficient time with them, getting to know them on a deep level, then it's hard to be able to teach these lessons.
And the same thing's
That's
true,
a
I
good
think,
point.
with the tension. If you're not spending time with them, you're not going to create, you're going to be this passive presence in their life, then there isn't going to be conflict. And that's a lot easier, is to just let them go play video games and go off and do the things that, they want to do. In order to have an effect in their life, you have to have this presence, this conscious presence that requires time, and interest. I know you take your son, you guys take boxing lessons together, and you do a lot of physical activities together and things like that. So it's not just about, a dialogue, but it's doing these things that then can create dialogue as well, these lessons out of that. And I think what you're doing here really well is you're bestowing masculinity onto your son through lessons of teaching. So we're going to go do this. Yes, it's hard, but that's what men do. Men do hard things. And I think that's the thing of that's where it comes out of a place of love. I love you enough that I'm going to make you grapple with me, as opposed to like, I'm just going to give into the tension and let you do whatever you want, which is the easy thing.
When you said about tension as well, we forget that tension and conflict is an opportunity to connect. Because as nice guys, we think when it's tension and when it's conflict, it's going to result in disconnection. It's going to result in, I'm being abandoned, and that's it. It's the worst thing create scenario. That's, when your woman says to you, we need to talk, suddenly it just alarm bells ring off. But actually, in those moments, that tension and conflict is an opportunity to connect and get deeper with intimacy.
Yeah. Ari, is your father still around?
He is. Yeah.
He is. Yeah. So
I see him pretty regularly.
Yeah. Yeah. I see mine not as regularly. I mean, I see him probably once a month or something like that. But yeah, they were just over this weekend. And my father's now in his 80s, and he's just I look at him, he's not old anymore. He's elderly. He's kind of hunched over and shuffles, and you know, and as they were leaving, I gave him a hug, and I just really felt like this appreciation for him, this love. You know, it's really easy to just kind of like, oh yeah, love you, Dad, have a good, you know. But it was really more a sense of gratitude and appreciation, because I think that, you know, and I've said this before, even though my dad was passive and even though he had these flaws, ultimately he helped me become, it was his absence and his flaws actually that I needed in order to become the man that I am today. Like, I wouldn't be who I am today if it wasn't for him. So the point is not to blame your father and say, oh, you hurt me, and you get into the victim state, but to rather see, when you heal those wounds inside of you, I think what happens is there's this transmutation of victimization to this place of like, I am giving you love. Like, I'm now the one who is like kind of taking care of you in a sense. And I think that that's a beauty of the full arc of the masculine, you know, of, you know, we go from this stage of, you know, warrior, you know, to, you know, king and magician and lover, but we also go to the place, I think, of the sage, which is that elderly, older wisdom that comes out of that frailty. And that's a place for us to honor the masculine that's gone before us.
It's beautiful. That when you talked about compassion, one of the things I learned about the masculine wound or the father wound was that before I rush into judging is to understand, understand that. And there's a really amazing quote by Eckhart Tolle, and let me read this out. It says, if his past was your past, his pain your pain, his level of consciousness your level of consciousness, you would think and act exactly as he did. With this realization comes forgiveness, compassion, and peace.
Yeah.
So if we had the same upbringing, the same experiences, the same consciousness, the same blueprint in the mind, we would behave and act exactly in the same way. And when we understand this, with everybody, we'll understand that we have understanding and compassion, and then we stop finger pointing and saying, "Oh, my dad was this or this was that." It was just that you would have done exactly the same thing if you were in those same shoes.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that's what helps us have empathy, helps us to have grace for someone else, and to be able to say, yeah, I mean, cliche, but there, but for the grace of God go I, that I don't think anyone acts from a place of, that they want to hurt unless they've been deeply hurt themselves. And hurt people. And if we're hurt and we don't heal those wounds, we will in turn hurt people from our wounds.
Yeah, the other thing I think we talked about today is there's nothing like being a parent yourself to give you empathy and compassion for your own parents.
For sure. I was actually thinking about this morning because I have a daughter. I have a biological daughter, I have a stepdaughter, and then I have two stepsons that are, and I don't have a whole lot involvement in their life because they were older when I came into their world. But I was thinking this morning, like, I'm really a little grateful that I didn't have boys, because I would have fucked them up royally. Because I was so wounded, and and then when my daughter was pregnant last year, I was like, please God, let it be a boy, let it be, I want to sort of a chance at this. And she had a girl, but they're not done, so it's still in the cards. But Yeah, I desperately, at this stage of my life, want a son, someone who I can kind of like have that bond with. And I feel like I'm kind of missing out on that somewhat. And this is probably
I'll
why I
send
like
you.
moving. You
I'll
said
send
Cameron
you my
over?
son then. Now, yeah, I'll send both of the boys over.
Yeah.
You can
Yeah,
handle the
for
tension and the
5
stress of
minutes.
it.
I'm like, Faisal, go get these guys.
Yeah, you say, oh gosh.
All right, guys. Well, this has been a great conversation, and I really appreciate the depth and honesty that we all were sharing here today about our fathers, because I know this is a really sensitive topic sometimes, and it's one that we don't really talk about enough, I think, as men. And I also think that this is part of the reason why we need other men in our lives, is because when we have a father wound, we need to be refathered. We need to be fathered by other men. And so this is why it's important to have mentors and teachers and brothers and have a community of other men that are speaking into your life, because I think the primary way that we heal our masculine wound, and our masculine wound comes from the father, is by being around other men and sharing those experiences and realizing, okay, I'm not alone, or there is a similarity, but there's a difference. And we're able to kind of sharpen each other, I think, in a way that you can't do with, a mixed gender group or the feminine. And it's just been one of the most important aspects of my own personal growth, has been involved in men's work, being involved with brotherhood, getting teachers, mentors, coaches speaking into my life and helping me. So I just want to say thanks, you guys, for showing up and bringing your stories today.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I guess we'll see you guys next time on The Nice Guy Show.
You've been listening to The Nice Guy Show, the podcast that helps nice guys move past their insecurities and fears into the fullness of their masculine strength and confidence. Be sure to like and subscribe to our podcast and check out the website niceguyshow.com for more information on how to connect with Chuck and Faisal. Until next time, keep living your best life.